Thank you, Colin. And just before we move into our first panelist discussion, and thanks to our panelists in advance, someone I did mention, Colin, just remind me there as well. You will hear, particularly now over the last 3 assembly meetings, a lot more people advocating for certain positions, both from statutory bodies, non-statutory bodies, individuals, organisations, and that's what we want. We want people to come and have this debate, and that's a safe place to have it. But this is your process. So where you're reading or you're hearing a lot of media coverage on something, this is your process to absorb all of that information and all of those views and all of those advocated positions and come to a view and a conclusion in October. So just to remind you of that, this is your process overall. In doing so, can I just go straight into our first panel session where we are talking about some of the issues around supply side related. I'll introduce our 4 panellists, and we've one on Zoom as they each come to the podium, so rather than doing it all twice. So first of all, can I welcome Michael O'Sullivan. Michael is a retired very senior Garda and also working with an international organisation related to drug supply. And very pleased that Michael has given us time here to be with us today and has been a communicator and media on this issue as well. So Michael, you're very welcome. And just to say in advance to all of our speakers, apologies in advance, we do have to keep it to bang on time. So I'll Colin and myself led on that process. So thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Michael O'Sullivan, as introduced. I just want to, by way of background, I began working at drugs in 1980 as a young detective in the drug squad back in Dublin. And throughout my 40-year career in the Garda Síochána, I've worked with the various stakeholders in the national drug strategy. I've worked with the drug and alcohol task forces, and I see some of the faces around here who are still in the business, still giving their commitment and their drive and energy to tackle the drug problem. And many of them have worked in the past, I'm acutely aware of this, on a completely voluntary basis. So it's great to see them around, it's great to see that level of drive. I've worked also with the Ministers for Drugs back in the past, and as I say, the implementation of the various drug strategies. So the opinions I express are my own opinions, having spent 45 years working at law enforcement, and I've seen both sides of the fence, is what I'm trying to tell you. So I moved on then to the Maritime Analysis Operations Centre. It's MAOC for short. It's an EU agency. It's a little bit like, I suppose, Europol. It's a nerve centre based in Portugal, in Lisbon, and it has representatives from 7 countries. It's basically an intelligence centre, and its task is to organise the interception of drug shipments from South America and indeed North Africa. And it was set up in 2007 and is quite successful. It is known as Europe's front line against drugs. I just, by way of a snapshot, this is my only slide really, that's the cocaine shipments. That's the cocaine routes, and the routes will depend on the level of law enforcement activity, the level of naval interceptions, and it's quite a challenging role for the people who have to do what they do. But more importantly, I'm trying to show you the problem from the point of view of the cocaine problem and why it's all going to Europe, why it's coming from South America. It's about consumer bases. MAOC, just before I left, seized some 27 vessels with a total value of about 4 billion euros of cocaine, all heading for Europe, all heading for organised crime units. The various people in South America see the value of cocaine in Europe. The prices are strong, the prices are high. Why are people using cocaine? Well, unlike a lot of other drugs, a lot of people are using cocaine because they want to. It's a bit like in Ireland. We have seen, I remember working during the recession, drug prices, cocaine prices fell. In fact, nobody had the money to buy cocaine and the dealers hadn't got the money to import it. It is purely driven, in many cases, on disposable income. It's just something to bear in mind. It's unlike other drugs such as heroin, and heroin's completely different to it, completely different market. So you cannot compare like with like. What is the value of the cocaine? The cocaine business, it's estimated at 9 billion. Personally, I think it's gone up to about 10 or 12. So it's 9 billion euros. People are buying it because they want to, mainly as a social drug, and mainly because they can. And it's a very difficult drug to combat, and it's very difficult to tell people don't buy cocaine for a half dozen reasons, which I don't have time to go into. But it's rare, just a footnote, it's rare you see any health education warnings regarding which is something I've watched slip over the years. That whole health education thing seems to informing the public, informing young people in particular who think it's cool to use cocaine. Moving on, there's a phrase that I hate people using, and it came from Richard Nixon's administration in 1971, the war on drugs. You know, the war on drugs gives the impression, it's phraseology that's outdated. The war on drugs is lost, or it's won, or it's ongoing. It's not. The war against drugs gives the impression that law enforcement can solve the problem. They certainly can't. Law enforcement are keenly aware that they cannot police the drug problem away. Drug enforcement is only one aspect of a broad range approach in conjunction with the drug strategy of prevention, rehabilitation, and research. If any of those four pillars of our current drug strategy are weakened, underfunded, or in any way eroded, the system starts to slow down and fail. You can have any amount of police seizing any amount of drugs, but if you don't have the rehabilitation services lined up, you're at nothing, particularly in the heroin business, which I'll come to in a minute. I've got 8 minutes here, folks, so I'm going to whiz through a lot of this. I hear phrases such as, we'll take drugs out of the hands of criminals. That can't be done. It's never been done in no country, and I've worked all over the globe. It has never been done. Criminals will be here, if all the drugs in the world disappears this evening, they'll be in business tomorrow, because drugs is just one aspect of what organized crime does. They're into firearms trafficking, human trafficking, intimidation, kidnapping, shootings, murders. That's what they do. Criminals are here to stay. Taking drugs out of their hands, unfortunately, can't be done. You know, as I say, it's important to look at the difference in the markets in drugs. It's very important that the strategies are correct in dealing with the various drugs. Just to touch on heroin, which is a huge problem, I think we've something in the region of 21,000 heroin addicts in the country. I saw today we had 6,000 and 7,000, and you could only get heroin in Dublin. Now you can get it throughout the country. The heroin consumer base, the heroin addicts, are completely different to the guys who are buying cocaine. The heroin addict, as you probably, some of you may already know this, so I'm just starting from basics. The heroin addict needs to buy that heroin on a daily basis. He needs to get off the drugs, and in many cases they want to get off the drugs, and in many cases they don't have the willpower, and for a whole range of reasons they can't get off the drugs. So there needs to be a humane approach to help getting them off the drugs. Now, the Irish system, you may or may not know, if a heroin addict is caught in possession of heroin, he goes to court. He goes to court and they get a probation officer to do a probation report. And he comes back to court and he's told, go and get treatment, which is easier said than done. It's very difficult and challenging for the heroin addict, and it's even challenging to get that treatment. But it's all about funneling the people who need treatment into the treatment services. It's not just about arresting them, but you're as good as your treatment services and you're as good as your process that gets them into treatment. You know, most of the heroin addicts, if not all of them, they don't want to be on heroin. But by landing in front of a judge is a catalyst. It's a wake-up call. They're talking about quitting tomorrow, quitting the next week, or the families are trying to get them off it, and they want to get off it themselves. They lead a very chaotic and difficult and dangerous life. The Irish system, I've watched it work with heroin addicts. And in my opinion, it works. I see in recent past, people are talking about the Portuguese model. I've just spent the last 4 years working in Lisbon. I've seen the Portuguese model. I've worked with the Portuguese police. The Portuguese model, the Portuguese may be happy with it. Do I think it's a solution to our problems or to anybody else's problems? No, I don't. There's a lot of misinformation about the Portuguese model. The Portuguese model is completely different, but before I talk about the model, and I'm going to talk about it very, very briefly, because I'd say, I'm nearly running out of time. Minute and a half. The Portuguese model funnels people into the treatment services. but it does it by a dissuasion committee. But you're not dealing. The Irish criminals are completely different to the Portuguese criminals. Why? Unfortunately for us, we have a level of criminality and a level of violence and viciousness in our criminal society, in our criminal underclass, that the Portuguese are lucky they don't have, both in adults and in juveniles. We don't have feuds, we don't have people running around trying to murder each other, we don't have guys running around with machine guns around hotels. The Portuguese model, for that reason, won't work. They have a dissuasion commission. Dissuasion commission, you funnel the person to the commission and they try and get you off drugs. We have the courts. We've been doing it since 1977. The Portuguese have been doing it since 2000. Will it work here? There's a half dozen more reasons which I don't have time to tell you. That it certainly won't. Okay, I have to finish up. In finishing up, folks, I want to say that you have a very difficult job ahead. And I just want to make 2 points. Having experienced many of the systems throughout the world, I believe the Irish system for dealing with drug misuse is as good as any and better than most. And by the system, I mean not just the criminal justice system, I mean the treatment services. But it needs greater resourcing, especially the treatment services. And I'm getting red lights now. And there's one thing I've no doubt, that if the laws are relaxed in this country, you're going to see a surge in the use of drugs. There's no doubt about that. Ladies and gentlemen, good luck with your task. Thank you.